In the sultry heat of summer, the Carolina lowlands stretched endlessly under a relentless sun, the air thick with the scent of magnolia and river mud. In 1846, the sprawling plantations of the South were a world apart from the cities and towns that dotted the eastern seaboard. Life on these plantations was a complex, rigid hierarchy where every glance, every whispered word, and every shadow could define your fate. It was in this world of wealth, power, and secrecy that one story would unfold, a story so strange, so unsettling, that it blurred the lines between master and servant, privilege and survival. This is the story of the plantation son who lived hidden among the slaves. The young son of a prominent plantation owner was never meant to be seen in public, or so the whispers went. Rumors claimed he bore a striking resemblance, not just to his father, but in certain uncanny ways, to the enslaved workers who toiled under the merciless Carolina sun. Families on plantations often held secrets, but the secret of the master's son was unlike any other. It was a secret that threatened the very order of the plantation itself. And yet, despite the danger, he lived. Hidden, unseen, moving through the quarters and fields, learning their stories, their struggles, their quiet defiance, all while the plantation's white elite remained blissfully unaware. The story begins on a night thick with tension. The crickets hummed, and the cicadas sounded like a chorus, while the distant river reflected the silver moonlight across the endless fields of cotton and tobacco. In the shadows of the slave quarters, a boy watched the world with wide, cautious eyes. He did not belong, or, at least, no one could publicly claim him as belonging. Yet, somehow, he belonged everywhere. Among the enslaved, he moved like one of them. In the rare glimpses near the main house, he felt the weight of eyes that could never see the truth. His very existence was a balancing act, a tightrope walk over a world built on oppression and rigid social rules. It is important to understand the gravity of the times. Carolina in the 1840s was not merely a backdrop, it was a living, breathing character in this story. Plantation owners wielded enormous power, but they also lived in constant fear of scandal, rebellion, and the collapse of their carefully curated images of supremacy. Any hint of an impropriety, any rumor of a hidden child or a forbidden connection between master and slave could ruin a family overnight. The stakes for the hidden son were unimaginably high. Discovery could mean death, banishment, or lifelong suffering. And yet, the boy's existence was tolerated, even protected, but only under strict secrecy, hidden behind the veneer of plantation normalcy. The young boy, whose name has been lost to history, became a silent observer, learning the rhythm of life among the enslaved. He understood the unspoken rules of the quarters, the subtle signals that marked danger, and the small acts of rebellion that gave them dignity. He moved with caution, never drawing attention, blending in completely. By day, he labored alongside the other children in the fields, carrying baskets of cotton, sweeping the ground, listening to the stories of elders who had lived decades under bondage. By night, he listened more closely, memorizing the tales of escape, resistance, and survival that were whispered in the darkness, stories that the plantation masters hoped would never reach ears like his. Yet, in those stories, he found a strange sense of belonging, a connection to a community that, outwardly, could never accept him, but which quietly nurtured him. There was a paradox in his life. Though he was the son of privilege, he never experienced its trappings openly. The silks, the fine food, the rare toys, these were all denied to him in public. Yet, the lessons in secrecy, observation, and endurance became his true inheritance. He learned to navigate a world where appearances mattered more than truth, where a careless word could unravel decades of safety. Every day was a test. Could he smile convincingly, pretend ignorance, suppress instinct, and act as if he were entirely one of the enslaved, even while carrying the bloodline of the plantation owner? The challenge shaped him into someone both invisible and intensely aware, a ghost in the system that created him, yet also a witness to its cruelty and humanity alike. It is said that the hidden son bore a resemblance that was almost impossible to ignore. Some of the enslaved whispered to each other in hushed tones, remarking on the uncanny similarities between the boy and the master of the plantation. His features mirrored the stern jaw, the sharp eyes, the same curve of the mouth. In many ways, he was a reflection of the very man whose power over them was absolute. Yet this resemblance did not expose him. It seemed, instead, to shield him. Perhaps it was the careful orchestration of the adults who knew the secret, or perhaps it was fate, but the boy survived in a world where survival was rare and often brutal. Each day, he walked among the enslaved. Each whispered word he overheard, each glance from a suspicious overseer, was a thread in a web of tension that held him suspended between discovery and safety. Even the other children of the enslaved were drawn to him, though they sensed a subtle difference they could not name. He learned their games, their songs, their fears, and their small joys. In their eyes, he was both like them and unlike them, a mystery that stirred curiosity and perhaps admiration. By immersing himself in their world, he became an invisible student, learning lessons in courage, empathy, and endurance that would shape the man he was to become. In a twisted sense, the harsh reality of slavery offered him a strange education, one that wealth and privilege alone could never provide. It was an education in resilience, in silence, in the strength of the human spirit under the weight of oppression. But the danger of his existence was never far away. Plantation society had eyes everywhere: overseers, servants, neighbors, even children. Secrets in this world were fragile, delicate as glass, and one careless word could shatter them completely. Every day, the boy balanced on a knife's edge. The tension created a life filled with small victories and constant fear. Every safe day felt miraculous, yet it came with a constant weight of dread. How long could he remain hidden? How long before the truth would emerge, and the fragile illusion of his invisibility would collapse? These questions haunted the shadows of the Carolina night, whispers of a fate that could not be escaped, no matter how skillfully he navigated the world. And so, the stage was set. The boy, hidden in plain sight, would live through experiences few could imagine, witnessing the brutality of plantation life, seeing the cunning and courage of those forced into slavery, and learning the deepest secrets of a world built on injustice. He was a ghost, a witness, and a participant, and the story that unfolds is one of survival, deception, and the quiet power of human resilience. This is the story of the plantation son who lived hidden among the slaves, a story that would reveal truths no history book could fully capture, a story of a child invisible in plain sight, yet central to the drama that defined an era. The slave quarters of the Carolina plantation were a world apart from the grandiose mansion that overlooked the fields. They were simple structures, built from rough-hewn logs, their roofs sagging under the weight of years of neglect. Smoke curled endlessly from the chimneys, carrying the scent of cooking fires and the faint tang of sweat, soil, and toil. Within these cramped quarters, life was harsh, yet filled with small sparks of humanity, laughter between children, whispered lullabies, and stories passed down through generations. It was here that the plantation son learned the rhythms of a life that was at once alien and intimate, a life that would shape him in ways no school or tutor could. By day, he labored alongside the enslaved children in the cotton fields, learning not only the physical work required, but also the subtle social codes that governed every interaction. The children, though wary of this boy who seemed different, gradually began to include him, sensing a quiet curiosity and intelligence in his eyes. He learned to carry heavy baskets, to bend low in the sun, to move silently when the overseers approached, and to mimic the gestures and language of those around him. Every action, every word, every glance became a lesson in survival. He understood, almost instinctively, that any misstep could expose the secret of his true identity, and he grew increasingly vigilant, observing every nuance of behavior among the enslaved. Nighttime brought a different kind of learning. After the day's labor, the quarters would come alive with stories, oral histories that spoke of families torn apart, daring escapes, and moments of defiance. It was in these quiet hours, huddled near the fire or beneath the eaves of the cabins, that the boy began to understand the depth of courage and resilience possessed by the people around him. He heard of the Underground Railroad in passing, of hidden routes to freedom, and of the courage required to pursue them. Though he could not participate in these escapes, the stories filled him with admiration, empathy, and a growing sense of connection to a community that technically could never claim him as one of their own. One elder, a woman named Lillian, took a particular interest in the boy. She had been born into slavery on the plantation and had witnessed decades of cruelty and suffering. Yet she possessed a sharp wit and a wisdom that seemed almost otherworldly. She would often sit him down, guiding him gently with her stories, teaching him lessons about human nature, strategy, and the quiet power of observation. "You watch, you learn, and you survive," she would whisper, her voice steady but insistent. "The world will judge you for what you appear to be, not what you are. Remember that." It was the first time the boy realized that survival in this world was not only about hiding, but about understanding, calculating, and sometimes anticipating danger before it arrived. Yet the plantation was never truly safe, not for anyone. Overseers patrolled the fields with whips and suspicion in equal measure. They noticed differences, subtle as they were, and were quick to punish any perceived disobedience. The boy learned to read their moods, to anticipate their movements, and to retreat into shadows when necessary. His knowledge of the quarters, the hidden paths between cabins, and the secret ways to avoid detection became as important as the lessons he learned from the elders. He was navigating a complex network of human behavior, where every individual was a potential threat or a potential ally. The relationships he formed were not always simple. Other children occasionally mocked or challenged him, sensing something unusual but unable to articulate it. Adults sometimes regarded him with curiosity, suspicion, or outright hostility. Yet through all of this, the boy learned to exercise patience, discretion, and charm. He discovered that a well-timed word, a careful smile, or an act of assistance could build trust, even in a community where outsiders were always viewed with skepticism. These were not merely social lessons, they were survival strategies that would follow him for the rest of his life. As months passed, the boy became increasingly skilled at blending in. He could imitate speech patterns, humor, and even the subtle body language of the enslaved with a precision that bordered on uncanny. This skill was both a shield and a burden. It allowed him to move unnoticed, yet it reminded him constantly of the lie at the center of his existence. He was living a double life, one foot in the world of privilege and one foot in the world of suffering, always teetering on the edge of discovery. Every day was a balancing act, every interaction a potential risk. And yet, in this tension, he found a strange sense of purpose, a reason to exist quietly yet meaningfully among those who could never openly accept him. The boy also began to notice patterns of human behavior that others overlooked. He observed how fear could silence, how hope could inspire, and how loyalty often arose from necessity rather than genuine affection. He learned who could be trusted, who would betray, and how alliances formed in subtle ways. These insights would later prove critical as he faced increasingly dangerous challenges and threats to his hidden life. His intelligence, combined with his careful observation, allowed him to navigate the treacherous landscape of plantation life with a skill that far surpassed his age. But even amidst these lessons and connections, there was an ever-present undercurrent of danger. Rumors of escape attempts, punishments, and revolts circulated constantly, reminding him that the plantation was a world where cruelty could erupt without warning. The boy's understanding of these risks sharpened over time, and he became adept at predicting danger before it arrived. He learned to blend in, to mimic, to disappear, and above all, to survive. These skills would not only define his childhood but shape the man he would become, a figure at once invisible and central to the plantation's hidden history. By the end of his first year in the quarters, the boy had transformed from a curious, frightened child into a keen observer and participant in a world that was harsh, unpredictable, and yet full of lessons. He had begun to understand the delicate balance of power, trust, and secrecy that governed every aspect of life on the plantation. Each day was a test, each night a lesson, and each interaction a step toward understanding a society that would never fully accept him. In the shadows of the Carolina lowlands, he was learning to survive, to observe, and to exist in a liminal space where few could follow, and even fewer could imagine. As the seasons changed, the Carolina lowlands revealed a different rhythm. The oppressive heat of summer gave way to the damp chill of autumn, and the cotton fields, once vibrant with white blooms, were now dotted with the dull, brown remnants of harvest. For the hidden son, these shifts in the environment mirrored the increasing tension in his life. Though he had learned to navigate the quarters and blend among the enslaved, the ever-present threat of discovery was growing more urgent. The plantation was not merely a static backdrop. It was a living, breathing entity, its pulse quickened by gossip, suspicion, and the ever-watchful eyes of overseers and visitors alike. The first real signs of danger emerged quietly, like the subtle shift of a shadow at dusk. One morning, the boy noticed a new overseer patrolling the far fields, his gaze unusually sharp, his questions pointed. Unlike the usual overseers, who followed routine and seemed predictable, this man moved with purpose, scanning faces as though searching for a hidden truth. He lingered near the quarters longer than necessary, asking casual questions that seemed innocent on the surface, but carried the weight of inspection. The hidden son, sensing the subtle shift, adjusted his behavior. He moved slower in the fields, kept his voice lower, and learned to disappear into the line of laborers whenever the overseer's gaze lingered too long. Rumors spread quickly among the enslaved, carried by whispers in the dark or through coded messages during chores. Some spoke of other plantations facing unrest, of children discovered to be the product of secret unions between masters and slaves, and of the brutal consequences that followed. These stories were cautionary tales, but they struck a chord with the hidden son. He understood that his life, carefully hidden until now, could unravel with a single misstep or a careless word. The tension in the quarters became palpable as elders warned children to stay alert, to listen, and to never assume safety was guaranteed. It was during one of these tense weeks that the boy first experienced direct confrontation. While collecting water from the river, he was approached by a young overseer who had been observing the children in the fields. The boy's heart raced as the man's eyes lingered on him with an intensity that suggested recognition or suspicion. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, but he remained calm, mimicking the movements and demeanor of the other children. The encounter ended without incident, but the seed of fear had been planted. From that day forward, he was acutely aware that someone might uncover the secret he had spent years carefully protecting. The hidden son also began to notice subtle changes among the enslaved themselves. Some workers grew restless, their movements sharp and guarded, their conversations cautious. Fear had a way of permeating the air, infecting even the youngest children, and he felt it too, a knot tightening in his chest every time an overseer approached or a stranger entered the plantation. The quarters, once a place of relative safety and camaraderie, now felt charged with anticipation, as if the entire community were holding its breath, waiting for a storm that might never arrive, or might arrive with devastating force. At night, whispers grew louder, stories more urgent. The hidden son learned of a potential inspection by a visiting official, a man rumored to be relentless in rooting out irregularities on plantations. For weeks, the plantation prepared for his arrival, cleaning, organizing, and instructing everyone to act as if nothing unusual existed. The boy listened from the shadows, absorbing every detail, every instruction, every hushed warning. He understood that the visit could mean exposure, and that even the slightest anomaly, his presence, a misplaced word, a glance too long, might reveal him. He began to develop strategies, subtle ways to avoid detection, careful rehearsals of gestures, posture, and speech. One night, as he lay on the hard floor of the quarters, he dreamt of discovery. In the dream, the overseers stormed the cabins, shouting accusations and dragging him into the open for all to see. The dream felt so real that he woke in a cold sweat, heart pounding, convinced that it was a warning rather than a mere nightmare. Over time, these dreams became frequent, a psychological manifestation of the mounting pressure he faced. The boy realized that danger was no longer a distant possibility, it was imminent, creeping into every aspect of his existence. Yet amidst this rising tension, the boy's resourcefulness and intelligence began to emerge more vividly. He observed patterns in the overseer's behavior, learning when they were distracted, when they were most likely to overlook a detail, and when they were most vigilant. He began to understand that survival was not merely about hiding, it was about anticipating, strategizing, and exploiting small windows of opportunity. Each day became a calculated exercise in deception, each interaction a test of skill and composure. The hidden son was learning the art of living on the edge, where knowledge, patience, and observation became as vital as courage. By the end of this period, the plantation felt transformed. What had once been a rhythm of labor and quiet observation had now shifted into a tense dance of survival. The hidden son, though still young, had become a master of observation, acutely aware of every glance, gesture, and conversation. He had learned that danger often appeared subtly, in the tilt of a hat, the pause in a sentence, or the lingering stare of a stranger. And yet, through it all, he maintained the delicate balance of invisibility, moving through the quarters and fields like a ghost, his presence known only to those he trusted most. This period of tension laid the groundwork for the pivotal events to come. The hidden son's awareness, adaptability, and courage would be tested in ways he could never have imagined, forcing him to confront not only the dangers of exposure, but also the moral complexities of life on a plantation. He was no longer merely a hidden child. He was a participant in a high-stakes world where every decision could mean life or death, freedom or punishment. And as the shadows lengthened over the Carolina fields, the first true signs of danger promised that the hidden son's life was about to change forever. The morning air on the plantation was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and falling leaves as autumn settled fully over Carolina. There was a sense of stillness, a deceptive calm that made the shadows appear longer, deeper, and more ominous. The hidden son awoke before dawn, as he had for years, listening to the faint noises of the plantation stirring to life. Every footstep, every murmur, every creak of timber held meaning for him now. But this day would prove unlike any other. The fragile balance that had kept him safe for so long was about to be tested, in a way that no careful observation or skill could fully anticipate. It began with a new visitor, the plantation owner's cousin, a stern man from Charleston with a reputation for suspicion and scrutiny. He had come to inspect the estate's operations, ostensibly to ensure that the plantation met its quotas and that the labor force remained productive. But his presence was also a reminder that the hidden son's careful existence was fragile, vulnerable to the curiosity of outsiders. The overseers and household staff were visibly tense, whispering instructions and ensuring that the quarters were orderly, that everyone appeared calm, and that nothing hinted at irregularity. The boy could sense the tightening of the noose. His instincts told him that the day would not pass without incident. By mid-morning, the hidden son had been assigned to deliver water and supplies to the main house, a seemingly mundane task, but fraught with risk. As he approached the house, his eyes met those of the cousin for the first time. A chill ran down his spine. The man's gaze lingered longer than necessary, scanning the faces of the children and laborers as though he could peer straight into the hidden truths of the plantation. The boy instinctively lowered his eyes, mimicking the demeanor of the other children, yet he could feel the weight of scrutiny pressing against him, suffocating in its intensity. Every movement, every breath, felt loaded with the possibility of discovery. The first crack came unexpectedly. A small boy from the quarters, unaware of the hidden son's true identity, had tripped near the porch, spilling a bucket of water in a way that drew attention. The cousin's sharp voice rang out, demanding an explanation, and several overseers rushed forward. In the chaos, the hidden son found himself close enough to be noticed, a fleeting glance from the cousin flickering over him like a spark against dry wood. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The boy froze, knowing that any slip, any hesitation, could trigger questions he was not prepared to answer. It was then that Lillian, the elder who had long guided him, stepped in. Her presence was commanding, her voice calm but firm as she addressed the cousin's questions. "It was an accident," she said. "The children are careful, but accidents happen." Her explanation, coupled with her steady demeanor, deflected suspicion, buying the boy precious moments of safety. Yet even as he slipped back toward the shadows, he understood that he had come dangerously close to exposure for the first time. The incident left him shaken, the reality of his precarious position pressing on him with terrifying clarity. The day wore on, but the tension did not ease. Every glance from the cousin, every word of inquiry, felt like a potential trap. The boy moved through the plantation with heightened awareness, noting the positions of overseers, the routes through the quarters, and the small, secret ways he could avoid detection. He realized that his survival depended not only on blending in but on anticipating the intentions of others, reading subtle cues, and acting with near-perfect timing. He was learning, in the harshest possible way, that secrecy was never guaranteed, and that the world he navigated was filled with unpredictable danger. By evening, the cousin's inspection had passed, but the boy's sense of relief was tempered by a lingering fear. He had survived the day, narrowly, but he knew that the incident had left an impression. The overseers whispered among themselves, the children looked at him differently, and the shadow of potential exposure hung over him like a storm cloud. It was the first time he understood that his life depended not just on his own skill but on the vigilance, loyalty, and courage of those around him. That night, as the quarters grew quiet, the hidden sun reflected on the day's events. He realized that survival in this world required more than camouflage. It required strategy, foresight, and alliances. He began to plan, mapping routes, observing patterns, and noting weaknesses in the oversight that he might exploit if ever confronted again. The day's incident had shown him that the plantation structure, though seemingly rigid, had vulnerabilities, and that understanding these could mean the difference between safety and exposure. Yet, even as he strategized, the emotional toll weighed heavily upon him. The knowledge that his life hung by a thread, that discovery could come at any moment, was a constant, gnawing pressure. He understood that every friend, every confidant, every act of kindness could be both a shield and a potential liability. Trust was fragile, suspicion omnipresent, and the stakes higher than they had ever been. For the first time, he fully grasped the danger inherent in his existence, not as an abstract possibility, but as a tangible, ever-present reality. The first real threat had been revealed, and with it came a new level of awareness. The hidden sun was no longer merely an observer or a student of the quarters. He had become a participant in a deadly game of survival. Every day would demand skill, patience, and courage. Every encounter might test the limits of his ingenuity and composure. The plantation, once a place of routine and quiet observation, had transformed into a landscape of constant vigilance, where shadows could conceal truth and revelation alike. As the night deepened, the boy lay awake, listening to the soft breathing of the quarters, the occasional creak of the cabins, and the distant sounds of the river. He knew that the events of the day had marked a turning point. Danger was no longer a distant specter. It was tangible, immediate, and unavoidable. The story of the hidden sun would now unfold against a backdrop of heightened tension, where secrecy, survival, and cunning were the only tools he could rely upon. And as the Carolina wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of cold nights and longer shadows, the boy understood that his life had irrevocably changed. The days following the near discovery of the hidden sun were marked by a heightened sense of caution. Every footstep, every glance, and every word carried weight. The plantation, once a rhythm of labor and whispered stories, had transformed into a theater of constant vigilance. Yet, amidst this tension, something remarkable began to emerge: bonds of trust. The boy realized that survival required more than blending in. It required connection, understanding, and alliances forged quietly, often in the shadow of danger. One of the first bonds the boy strengthened was with Lillian, the elder woman who had guided him from the earliest days in the quarters. Her wisdom extended beyond survival. She understood the subtle dynamics of human behavior, the unspoken rules that governed life under oppression, and the delicate ways in which trust could be cultivated and maintained. "You cannot live alone in this world," she whispered one night as they sat near the cabin fire. "Even the cleverest must rely on others. Learn who will stand with you when the world threatens to expose your secrets." Her words resonated deeply, shaping the boy's approach to every interaction. Through Lillian, he began to meet others in the quarters who would become vital allies. There was Samuel, a young man whose family had been enslaved on the plantation for generations. Samuel was cautious, skeptical of outsiders, yet remarkably observant and brave. Over time, the hidden son earned Samuel's trust, initially through small acts, helping with chores, sharing knowledge of the plantation's hidden paths, offering assistance in ways that went unnoticed by overseers. Samuel, in turn, shared stories of the plantation's hidden corners, warning of where oversight was heaviest and where missteps could prove disastrous. Together, they began to form a network of subtle support, a web of understanding that was as crucial as it was fragile. Trust, however, was never given lightly. Every conversation, every gesture, was a test. The hidden son had to prove that he could be discreet, that he understood the stakes, and that he could navigate the delicate social landscape of the quarters without drawing attention. Mistakes could prove fatal, not only for him, but for those who dared to ally with him. The tension of this reality was always present, shaping every decision he made. He learned that trust was both a shield and a responsibility, requiring careful attention and unwavering commitment. Within this network, the boy began to gain access to knowledge that had previously been beyond his reach. Stories of distant plantations, of secret escapes, and of methods to avoid detection became part of his education. He learned not only about survival but also about resilience, ingenuity, and courage. These lessons were imparted subtly, often through shared tasks or whispered conversations at night, but their impact was profound. The hidden son began to see the plantation not merely as a place of danger, but as a complex ecosystem, where information, alliances, and strategy were as vital as labor or obedience. Yet even as trust deepened, the boy never lost sight of the ever-present dangers. Overseers patrolled the fields with the same vigilance as before, their eyes sharp and unforgiving. One misstep, a glance too long, a word spoken in jest, a path taken too boldly, could unravel everything. The hidden son became increasingly adept at observing the observers, noting patterns in their movements and behaviors, and using that knowledge to navigate the plantation safely. He developed a rhythm, a mental map of the safest routes and the moments when vigilance could be relaxed, even if only slightly. The bonds of trust also extended to the younger children in the quarters. They were the first to notice subtle changes, to sense threats before adults did, and to share information in ways that were almost imperceptible to the overseers. The hidden son became a mentor in small ways, guiding them through chores, games, and lessons in survival, while also learning from them the small, creative methods they used to avoid punishment or find moments of joy in a harsh world. These relationships were fragile yet vital, reinforcing the idea that survival was as much about community as it was about cunning. Over time, the hidden son began to understand the moral complexities of life on the plantation. He saw courage and cruelty, generosity and betrayal, often intertwined in ways that were impossible to separate. The enslaved were not only survivors but strategists, thinkers, and actors in a world that sought to deny them agency. By aligning himself with those who were most perceptive and courageous, the boy gained insights that went far beyond simple survival. He learned about the human spirit, resilience, and the subtle ways power could be challenged or subverted without drawing the deadly attention of those in control. These alliances, however, were tested repeatedly. Even a small error could compromise trust. A missed signal, a misheard instruction, or an inattentive moment could endanger not just the hidden son but the entire network of allies who had come to rely on him as much as he relied on them. The tension of this precarious balance shaped his character, forging patience, discretion, and emotional intelligence. He was no longer merely a hidden child. He was a participant in a delicate, high-stakes dance where every step mattered. By the end of this period, the hidden son had developed not only a network of trust, but also a deeper understanding of his own identity within the plantation. He was part of something larger than himself, a living thread in a community that, though marginalized and oppressed, wielded its own quiet power. The bonds he had formed would become critical in the events to come, providing both protection and insight as he navigated increasingly dangerous situations. In learning to trust and be trusted, he was discovering the true depth of human resilience and the power of alliances forged in the shadows of oppression. The stage was now set for the next phase of his journey. The hidden son, strengthened by these bonds and enriched by the knowledge of the quarters, would soon face challenges that tested the very limits of his courage and cunning. The stakes were higher than ever, and the danger more immediate. The bonds of trust he had cultivated would be tested in ways he could not yet foresee, shaping the course of a story that was as much about survival as it was about the human spirit. The hidden son had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the quarters, the quiet alliances, the shared knowledge, and the delicate balance of trust. Yet, even in the closest of communities, shadows existed where danger could fester unseen. In a world built on secrecy and survival, the greatest threats often came not from outsiders, but from those who walked among you, whose loyalties were fragile, whose ambitions could override caution. The first betrayal was a subtle one, creeping in like smoke before igniting into a blaze that threatened to expose everything. It began with whispers of a newcomer to the quarters, a young man named Tobias, who had been recently relocated to the plantation from another estate. On the surface, Tobias seemed unremarkable, quiet, polite, and diligent in his work. Yet, beneath the calm exterior lay ambition, envy, and a restless curiosity. He watched the hidden son closely, noting how he moved, how he interacted with others, and how the elders treated him with unusual care. Tobias's questions were casual, almost innocent, probing not only the boy's habits, but the routines of the quarters. He seemed to understand, in ways that unnerved the hidden son, that some children carried secrets far deeper than mere work or play. For weeks, Tobias observed silently, gathering fragments of information like a spider collecting threads. He noticed the boy slipping through corners unseen, the elders' protective glances, and the subtle signals exchanged among allies. The hidden son, though perceptive, underestimated the quiet cunning of someone desperate to carve a place for themselves within the fragile hierarchy of the quarters. Tobias's envy festered, fueled by the boy's perceived advantages, the guidance of Lillian, the respect of peers, and the innate ability to navigate danger. In Tobias's mind, knowledge equated to power, and power demanded exposure. The betrayal began with small, almost imperceptible acts. Tobias would misdirect overseers subtly, plant questions designed to provoke hesitation, and quietly spread doubts among other children in the quarters. These actions at first seemed trivial, easily dismissed. But the hidden son, sensitive to patterns and behavior, began to notice inconsistencies, conversations that seemed rehearsed, glances that lingered too long, and a creeping sense of surveillance from someone he had once considered a peer. The tension grew with each passing day, a silent drumbeat of impending danger that the boy could neither ignore nor confront openly. One evening, as the hidden son carried food to the farthest cabins, he overheard a conversation that chilled him to the bone. Tobias, speaking quietly to an overseer's assistant, mentioned details of the boy's movements, routines, and interactions, details that should have remained invisible to anyone outside the network of trust. The betrayal was no longer theoretical, it had crossed into action. Every careful step, every strategy the boy had relied upon for years was now vulnerable to exposure, and the fragile illusion of safety teetered on the edge of collapse. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, But the hidden son had learned too well the lessons of the quarters. Fear could be a tool if controlled, a weapon if wielded wisely. He retreated to Lillian, recounting what he had overheard in careful, measured words. She listened intently, her expression grave but composed. "Betrayal is part of life in this world," she said. "Some seek advantage through others' misfortune. You must act with precision, not emotion. Watch him, learn his weaknesses, and protect yourself through cunning, not confrontation." Her guidance reminded him that trust could be broken, but knowledge and strategy could still be leveraged to survive. Over the following days, the hidden son implemented a series of countermeasures. He altered routines, introduced decoys, and subtly misled Tobias with false movements and whispered misinformation. Every action was calculated, every step a test of strategy and endurance. Tobias, unaware of the countermeasures, continued his attempts, growing increasingly frustrated as his schemes failed to yield the exposure he sought. This silent chess game unfolded beneath the watchful eyes of the elders, whose subtle interventions provided protection without drawing attention to the conflict. Despite these precautions, the psychological toll was immense. The hidden son could no longer move freely, could no longer fully trust even those he had once counted as allies. Every glance from Tobias was a threat, every question a potential trap. Sleep became restless, dreams filled with shadows of discovery, and even the familiar comfort of the quarters was tinged with tension. The betrayal had transformed his world, turning a place of relative safety into a landscape fraught with constant vigilance, requiring not only skill but emotional resilience to navigate. Yet, amidst the fear and uncertainty, the hidden son discovered an unexpected strength. The challenge forced him to sharpen his instincts, refine his strategies, and deepen his understanding of human behavior. He began to anticipate Tobias's actions, predicting the moves of someone driven by envy and ambition. Each failed attempt by Tobias reinforced the boy's awareness that survival depended on foresight, patience, and the careful orchestration of trust and deception. The betrayal, while dangerous, became a crucible in which his resilience and cunning were forged. By the end of this period, the hidden son had transformed once again. No longer merely a cautious observer, he had become an active strategist, navigating both the external dangers of overseers and the internal threats posed by betrayal. He had learned that survival in the quarters required not only blending in but manipulating perception, protecting alliances, and outthinking those who sought to exploit vulnerabilities. The betrayal had revealed the fragility of trust, but it had also illuminated the path to empowerment, a lesson that would become crucial in the events to come. As the night fell over the Carolina lowlands, the hidden son lay awake, contemplating the fragile web of relationships that sustained his hidden life. He understood that the first betrayal was not the last, and that vigilance, cunning, and courage would be his constant companions. The shadow of Tobias's ambition loomed over the quarters, a reminder that danger often came from those closest to you. And as the wind whispered through the cabins, carrying the faint scent of cotton and smoke, the boy resolved to remain invisible, clever, and unyielding, ready to face whatever threats might arise next. The betrayal by Tobias had left the hidden son with no illusions. Safety on the plantation was no longer guaranteed. Each day brought new threats. Each glance carried the potential for exposure. Yet, amidst the fear and uncertainty, a spark of determination ignited within him. He had survived long enough to learn the rhythms of the quarters, to build alliances, and to understand the vulnerabilities of the overseers. Now, it was time to move from mere survival to action, to protect himself and those he trusted, and perhaps even to claim a measure of control over his destiny. The idea of escape was not a new one. It had been whispered in the quarters for generations. Tales of the Underground Railroad, hidden paths through swamps, and brave souls who had slipped past the grasp of their masters filled the hidden son's imagination. But what made this moment different was necessity. Tobias's betrayal had made it clear that staying passive was no longer an option. The boy began to plot, drawing on every lesson learned from Lillian, Samuel, and the elders. Every hidden path, every overlooked corner, Every routine of the overseers became part of a mental map, a blueprint for potential freedom or, at the very least, safety. The planning was meticulous. The hidden son spent long hours observing the patterns of patrols, noting the times when overseers were most distracted or preoccupied. He memorized the layout of the plantation, from the quarters to the river, from the barns to the dense woods that bordered the fields. Each ally had a role. Samuel would monitor the movements of the overseers, others would signal when the coast was clear, and Lillian would provide guidance and counsel from her cabin. The plan was delicate, requiring timing, precision, and absolute secrecy. One misstep, one accidental word, could destroy everything they had worked for. Despite the dangers, the hidden son's courage grew. He realized that fear could paralyze, but it could also sharpen the mind. Each calculation, each test, and each rehearsal of movements strengthened his resolve. He walked the hidden paths alone at night, testing them, imagining scenarios where discovery might occur and finding ways to counter them. The moonlight glinted off the river. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the fields, and the night air carried both danger and possibility. He had become a master of observation, not just surviving but anticipating every contingency. The allies he had cultivated in the quarters proved invaluable. Samuel and others provided constant vigilance, watching for the approach of overseers, warning of unexpected visitors, and offering small diversions to protect the hidden son's movements. Lillian, ever wise, reminded him of the importance of patience and subtlety. Act with purpose, not haste, she advised. The smallest misstep can unravel years of careful concealment. Trust those who have earned it, and watch those who have not. Her guidance reinforced the delicate balance between bold action and careful strategy. The plan itself was daring. Under the cover of night, using the dense shadows of the woods and the silence of the quarters, the hidden son would move through a series of pre-planned paths, avoiding patrols and the watchful eyes of overseers. Each step required precision. One false move could alert Tobias, who had grown increasingly suspicious, or an overseer who had begun noticing irregularities in the quarters. The boy rehearsed the route, memorized landmarks, and created contingencies for every possible interruption. It was a test not only of his physical skill but also of his mental discipline, patience, and cunning. Yet the plan carried risks beyond mere detection. The river, though a potential escape route, was treacherous at night, filled with hidden currents and unpredictable bends. The woods offered concealment but also concealed dangers, wild animals, uneven terrain, and the ever-present possibility of being discovered by patrols or travelers. Every decision involved weighing risk against reward, and the hidden son knew that hesitation could mean failure. He had learned to trust his instincts, but instinct alone was not enough. The success of the plan depended on strategy, timing, and the silent cooperation of allies who had stakes as high as his own. As the night of execution approached, the plantation seemed to hold its breath. The hidden son moved with extraordinary care, navigating shadows, listening for footsteps, and noting the smallest details that might indicate danger. Tobias's presence, once a distant threat, now felt immediate. Every interaction, every glance from him could jeopardize the plan. Yet, even in the face of this heightened risk, the boy felt a sense of empowerment he had never known. For the first time, he was not merely hiding. He was acting, shaping events, and taking control of his destiny in a way that defied the rigid hierarchies of the plantation. The night was long and tense, each step a test of endurance, observation, and courage. The hidden son relied on everything he had learned, the subtleties of movement, the timing of patrols, the silent signals of his allies, and the instinctive understanding of human behavior honed over years of careful observation. As the moon traced its arc across the sky, he pressed forward, heart pounding, every sense alert, knowing that discovery now could have devastating consequences, not only for himself, but for those who had trusted him. By the early hours of dawn, the first phase of the plan was complete. The hidden son had navigated the quarters, bypassed patrols, and reached the initial safe point near the river. The tension of near exposure had been replaced by a fragile sense of triumph, a fleeting taste of agency in a world that had long denied him control. Yet, he knew the greatest challenges were still ahead. The escape, though initiated, was far from complete, and the journey towards safety would demand courage, cunning, and resolve beyond anything he had yet experienced. The night air was thick with tension, the Carolina lowlands cloaked in shadows deeper than any the hidden sun had traversed before. The riverbank shimmered faintly in the moonlight, reflecting the dense woods that lay beyond, a pathway that promised freedom but demanded courage. Every step he had taken, every lesson learned, and every relationship forged now converged toward this single, perilous moment. The betrayal, the threats, the endless vigilance, all had led to this night. The stakes were higher than ever: survival, secrecy, and perhaps the first taste of autonomy in a life long defined by constraint. Tobias, driven by envy and curiosity, had grown increasingly bold. Rumors of the hidden sun's movements had reached him, and he had begun shadowing the boy under the guise of casual observation. Tonight, however, the boy knew Tobias would test the waters of exposure in earnest. Every nerve in his body screamed with anticipation, every instinct honed from years of survival now firing in unison. The forest path ahead offered concealment, but also danger, and the margin for error was razor-thin. Any misstep, any hesitation, could result in immediate discovery, not just of him, but of every ally who had aided him in silence. The first test came almost immediately. As he stepped lightly through the underbrush, he heard a rustling behind him, subtle, deliberate, and unmistakable. Tobias had followed. The hidden sun froze, muscles taut, heart pounding in rhythm with the unseen threat. He could sense the young man's eyes scanning for movement, every instinct of his life urging him to act, to flee, to deceive. But escape required more than instinct. It required patience, timing, and a calculated display of cunning he had spent years mastering. Drawing on everything Lillian had taught him, the boy shifted his path silently, altering his trajectory to appear as though he had vanished into the forest's depths. Tobias, expecting a predictable pattern, followed too closely, unaware that he was stepping into a series of subtle traps and misdirections set by the hidden sun. Each step was choreographed, each pause intentional, designed to exploit the assumptions of the pursuer. The forest, once a neutral backdrop, had become a stage for survival, and every leaf, branch, and shadow was now a tool in the boy's arsenal. The tension escalated when Tobias's foot caught on a hidden root, sending a snap echoing through the woods. The sound startled both, the hidden sun's heart skipping a beat, Tobias freezing mid-step. This single moment became a turning point, a delicate balance between exposure and advantage. Using the brief distraction, the boy executed a subtle maneuver, slipping behind a dense thicket that obscured him completely. Tobias, frustrated and unaware of the deception, searched in vain, his assumptions leading him astray. The hidden sun realized, in that instant, the power of preparation, foresight, and composure under pressure. As he moved toward the river, the hidden sun's mind raced. The path ahead was fraught with danger. The water was swift, deep in places, and unfamiliar. Crossing it would require precise timing and physical skill, yet he knew it was the only way to reach safety. The distant sound of patrols, the occasional flicker of torchlight, and the memory of past betrayals all underscored the stakes. The river was both a barrier and a gateway, a final test that demanded everything he had learned in his hidden life. With allies signaling from safe vantage points, the hidden sun began his cautious approach. Samuel, positioned upstream, gestured with subtle hand movements, guiding him toward a safer crossing point. Other children kept watch, their eyes sharp for any sign of danger, ready to create diversions if needed. The boy's trust in them was absolute now. He understood that survival was a collective effort, a delicate dance in which every participant played a critical role. Together, they navigated the treacherous path, blending caution with courage in a way that few could have achieved without years of preparation. The climax reached its peak as Tobias, realizing he had been misled, emerged on the opposite bank of the river, blocking the boy's initial path to freedom. A tense standoff ensued, silence hanging thick as fog over the water. The hidden son, calm despite adrenaline coursing through his veins, confronted the young man's envy and curiosity with measured words. He did not strike, did not flee immediately. He used reason, observation, and strategy to exploit Tobias's impulsiveness. In a subtle maneuver, he drew Tobias toward a narrow, unstable riverbank, where a misstep caused the young man to stumble, losing his balance and granting the hidden son the precious seconds needed to slip into the current. The river's cold embrace was shocking, yet liberating. Every stroke, every struggle against the current, was a testament to the boy's resilience and preparation. Tobias's shouts echoed behind him, but the hidden son, focused on the path ahead, remained undeterred. The water carried him past the danger, the darkness shielding him from immediate pursuit, and toward a small clearing where the first light of dawn broke over the Carolina horizon. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of autonomy. He was not merely surviving, but actively shaping his destiny. As he emerged from the river, shivering and exhausted, the hidden son reflected on the journey that had brought him here. Every lesson, every bond of trust, every careful observation had culminated in this moment of triumph. He had faced betrayal, danger, and relentless scrutiny, yet he had prevailed through a combination of cunning, courage, and the quiet support of those who had believed in him. The plantation behind him was no longer a cage, but a memory, a crucible in which his character had been forged. The revelation came not only in physical escape, but in understanding the true power of resilience, trust, and strategy. The hidden son, once invisible and vulnerable, had transformed into a figure capable of shaping his own fate. He had learned that survival required more than hiding. It required foresight, alliances, and the courage to act when the moment demanded. In the end, the river was not just a boundary, but a metaphor for the passage from fear to agency, from secrecy to control, and from childhood vulnerability to the first taste of self-determination. As dawn spread across the Carolina lowlands, the hidden son stood at the edge of the forest, looking back one final time at the plantation that had defined his life for so long. Shadows still lingered in the quarters, secrets still whispered in the wind, but he had passed through them, strengthened by experience and fortified by knowledge. The journey ahead was uncertain, the world beyond the plantation unknown, but for the first time, he moved forward on his own terms. The climax had passed, but the story of courage, ingenuity, and survival would continue in every step he took beyond the shadows.